Was naegscht? What next? In this video, I'm going to give you some tips and recommendations for how to continue your study of Pennsylvania Dutch. Now, in the last lecture, we looked back a little bit of what we already know, and I want to start this one with that same look back. So if you've completed the lesson series on Learn the Basics of Pennsylvania Dutch, you know a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch grammar, certainly enough to start reading Pennsylvania Dutch texts. You know a little bit of vocabulary, but you'll need to learn a lot more as you go along. Grammar is kind of like the engine of a car. It's the key ingredient that makes the car able to go. But vocabulary is like the gasoline that actually fuels the engine. If you have the grammar, you have the ability to go places, but you need the vocabulary. Now, a great way to start accumulating this vocabulary is with the online dictionary, PA-DutchDictionary.com. You should use that all the time. Check it out now. You'll see a link on the bottom, in the description of this video. That's all done by a volunteer. So I and many other people who like to read Pennsylvania Dutch are very grateful for the volunteers who have put PennsylvaniaDutchDictionary.com online. The online version is based on Lambert's Pennsylvania Dutch Dictionary from the early 20th century. Lambert preferred words that came from Continental German over loan words. And this means when you're using PennsylvaniaDutchDictionary.com, especially when you're going from English to Dutch, you have to be a little bit careful because it will often give you a word that's connected with Continental German, regardless of whether that word is commonly used in modern Pennsylvania Dutch. Just for example, if you look up the sure in English, the Dutch dictionary, that is S-U-R-E, like I'm sure of something, it probably gives you sicher, the Continental German word, sicher. And that's not used in, at least to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania Dutch country. Most people in Pennsylvania Dutch country say sure, a loan word coming from English. So to say I am sure, you would say ich bin sure. You wouldn't say ich bin sicher. So you have to be a little bit careful. Take a grain of salt, the English to Dutch side, just because Lambert, the original dictionary upon which Pennsylvania PA-DutchDictionary.com is based, favored German words over loan words. But that said, it's still an amazingly useful resource, and you should get familiar with it. And you should read a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch. That's your next step, is really start digging in to reading Pennsylvania Dutch. Now, once you start reading, you're going to encounter a problem early on. And that is that there is no standard way of spelling Pennsylvania Dutch. There's no national body that controls Pennsylvania Dutch. So every author, every publication chooses a slightly different way of spelling Pennsylvania Dutch. But there are essentially two systems. There's one system that's based on German, that is standard German, and there's one system that's based on English. And they have pluses and minuses. I'd say in Pennsylvania, the German system is much more common. In the Midwest, the English system is much more common. Or earlier on in the late 19th century in Pennsylvania, the English system was quite common too, or systems based upon English were quite common. And they have pluses and minuses. I think ultimately that the German system is better. I think it does a better job of explaining the sounds, and it connects the words with their etymologies, and it connects the Pennsylvania German dialect with the other dialects of German. In fact, if you can read the German system of spelling Pennsylvania Dutch, you're about 3/4 of the way to being able to read standard German. And there's something to be said for that. But let's take a look at some of these other spelling systems. We'll look at an English-based system. This is from the translation of the Bible into Pennsylvania Dutch that the Wycliffe Bible translators put together. I believe this was mostly Ohio Amish and some Mennonites who put it together. And they used an English way of spelling Pennsylvania Dutch. Using English is more common out in the Midwest. The dialect they're using is also Midwest Pennsylvania Dutch, so there's little differences. from Pennsylvania Dutch, but they're not great. Let's take a look at this. So I'm recording these lectures around the time of Easter. So I've chosen a passage here from Acts 2. And our verse here is, Gott hat der Jesus, sorry, I'm going to start again. Gott hat der Jesus aufgeweckt und losgemacht von die Schmerzen vom Tod. That's our little verse. Gott hat der Jesus aufgeweckt und losgemacht von die Schmerzen vom Tod. And that's using a English style spelling. And the difficulty here is, it is entirely, if you read it out loud and you know Pennsylvania Dutch, you can understand it. But if you don't know all the words and you try looking up in the dictionary, it's going to be, you're not going to find them in padictionary.com. Like if you looked up that word aufgeweckt, G-V-E-K-T, you're not going to find it. If you look up that third word, D-E-A-H, you're not going to find that in the dictionary, padutchdictionary.com. Now, there is a separate dictionary which was published along with the translation of the Pennsylvania Dutch Bible. So there is a separate dictionary for the Pennsylvania Dutch Bible. If you decided you want to do a lot of reading in this text, it would make sense to buy the dictionary that goes along with it, just to make it so much easier to look up words you don't know. Now, what I've done is I've gone ahead and kind of respelled this translation or this particular verse into a German style spelling system like we've been using. Gott hat der Jesus aufgeweckt und losgemacht von die Schmerzen vom Tod. Now it's pronounced, in fact, exactly the same, but the spelling, as you can see, is really different. And suddenly, you'll be able to find these words in the dictionary. So that strange G-V-E-K-T, if we look in our German spell system, we can see that's aufgeweckt. In fact, if you've been paying close attention to our lectures, you've already encountered this word. This means woken up. It's the past participle of aufwecken, to wake up. And if you were to look this up in padutchdictionary.com, you'd find the word. In fact, if you look at any of these words there, you'd find the words. So part of the practice when you start reading texts is kind of figuring out how their spelling sounds and what those spellings would look like in your dictionary, and then trying to find those spellings in your dictionary. So you kind of have to respell everything into what you think it might look like in the dictionary you're using if you don't recognize the word. Now, once you have a decent vocabulary in Pennsylvania Dutch, you won't have to look things up so much. You just have to kind of pronounce them. You'll be like, oh yeah, now that I say it out loud, I can hear it. But until that time comes, there's a fair amount of trying to guess what the spelling system is in the dictionary you happen to have and looking up that way. Now, I've also given you some ideas for more books and more websites to visit. So let's look at the books first, printed materials. These days, there are lots of textbooks that can teach you Pennsylvania Dutch, and there are strengths and weaknesses to all of them. My personal recommendation is John William Fry's A Simple Grammar of Pennsylvania Dutch, first published in 1942. Now, since then, it's been republished multiple times. It's still in print. I like this book because it's quite straightforward. It's to the point. It has clear explanations of grammar. It introduces core vocabulary, and it has quite a few exercises where you go from Dutch into English and English into Dutch. It's about 150 pages, really well thought out, in my opinion, and really well designed. Doesn't overwhelm you in any given lesson. Progresses in a very logical order, focusing on key aspects of the language, and at the same time, it manages to cover lots of fine details as well. So I would highly recommend that you pick this book up and you start working through it. You can find it on Amazon and other places. And a lot of it you'll understand already. So you'll be from these lessons on the basics of Pennsylvania Dutch. So you'll be able to work through this book pretty quickly, but it's going to fill in some of the details that we didn't include in our lecture series. Now, another book I highly recommend is Mit Pennsylvanisch Deutsch das Jahr. It came out in 2006. Once again, you can find this on the internet, on Amazon, for example. And what this book is an anthology of Pennsylvania Dutch pieces. It's all in Pennsylvania Dutch, which I love. It forces you to stay in your target language. And it's organized by the year. It's organized by the seasons of the year. So there are pieces about January, about February, about March, etc. In January, there are poems about the snow and going sledding. And February, there are folklore about Fastnachts and spring cleaning. In April, there's information about how the Pennsylvania Dutch celebrated Easter. All of these short extracts, they range from about a paragraph to at most 2 pages. So they're quite short. You can get through them. It's not like tackling a whole novel. You can sit down and work on one piece. Use padutchdictionary.com to look up the words you don't know. It uses a German-style spelling system, so it's quite straightforward. It's what you're used to already. And it'll teach you not just a whole bunch of vocabulary for Pennsylvania Dutch, it'll also teach you about Pennsylvania Dutch culture and the rhythms of the year in Pennsylvania Dutch country. So I highly recommend those 2 books. They're not online, so you'd have to go and find the printed copies. You can get them on Amazon, like I say, but a good place to know of is Mastiffs Press and Bookstore. They have an online presence, so you could order things online. But they also have a physical bookstore. It's in Morgantown in northern Lancaster County. That's just off I-76. So if you live in Berks County or Lancaster or Montgomery or York, it's actually quite easy to get to, well, easy, I say about maybe an hour, depending where you live, to get to Mastiffs Bookstore. Certainly worthwhile going there and browsing the shelves one day. They've got lots of things. They have Pennsylvania Dutch language materials, but they also have lots of materials about Pennsylvania Dutch culture, more broadly speaking, and especially about Mennonite culture and a bit about Amish culture. Certainly worthwhile going there and spending an hour or so browsing around in person. Now, of course, there are lots of internet materials these days as well. And the most important one you should know is Doug Maidenford's materials. You can find them all grouped together at his website, padutch101.com. And this is what that looks like, PA Dutch 101. You can see he's got a blog to which he contributes on a regular basis. And he usually includes a sound recorded version of that blog as well, which is great for practicing listening to Pennsylvania Dutch. And then he has several YouTube videos. You can see them, many YouTube videos. You can see them linked here. He's got videos on Dutch grammar. He's got videos on Dutch vocabulary. They're often illustrated, so you see a picture of a chicken and it says Hinkel. And you can repeat after Doug. And Doug grew up in his kind of northern Berks County Dutch and the fancy Dutch culture. And he concludes these videos not just about grammar, but also about aspects of Pennsylvania Dutch culture. So your PA Dutch Minute and your Ask a PA Dutchman, those talk about various aspects of Pennsylvania Dutch culture. And sometimes a lot of them are humorous or have a bit of humor in them. So you should definitely check out those videos from Doug Maidenford, PA Dutch 101. Another great thing to do is join a Facebook group so that you can interact with people who are also studying Dutch or speak Dutch. Sometimes the conversation is in Dutch, sometimes it's in English about Dutch. Few people write in standard German. There are lots of these groups available. One good one is Kannst du Deutsch schwätzen? So you can see it here, screenshot of the opening page, and you gotta love that they've got the Schnitzelbank song there as their kind of picture. Kannst du Deutsch schwätzen? And to find groups like this on Facebook, you just type in the name into the search bar and search. It's a private group. If you've ever joined a Facebook group before, it doesn't mean it's private because like anything secret's being discussed. It's just a way of making sure that there are no trolls, basically. And so you say, hey, can I join the group, using that join button, and they'll say, yep, and there you go. And then you can talk with other people, ask questions, post comments, all sorts of things about Pennsylvania Dutch. It's a great way of interacting with other people. Especially if you're learning on your own, these things are really valuable. And I also want to plug my Twitter feed, my Pennsylvania Dutch Twitter feed, which is @Ralph. You can see it here. And this is something I put together mostly for myself as a way of working on my own Pennsylvania Dutch vocabulary. Henry Ralph wrote a book, the Pennsylvania Dutch Handbook, and he begins it with a dictionary from English to Dutch and Dutch to English. And it's a particularly useful dictionary because Ralph really embraced loan words. I mentioned how Lambert kind of avoided loan words in his dictionary, but in Ralph's dictionary of 1879, he embraced all the loan words that he saw in Pennsylvania Dutch. So when he thought that a loan word was the most common word in the dialect, that's what he gave. And you have to remember that a lot of these loan words, they're not just the English word. A lot of these loan words had been adapted into Pennsylvania Dutch forms. So they're not a straightforward loan word. They're words that have been adapted into Pennsylvania Dutch, but they ultimately come from English rather than from Dutch, or rather from Continental German. Words like sure, for example, meaning sure. So it's really useful for that. I tweet out one word a day on this. I update the spelling system to the modern German-style spellings. And it's a great way of learning Pennsylvania Dutch words, one word at a time. And some words will catch your attention. You learn them more than others, of course, and that's great. I also do a little bit of comment sometimes about the words if they need some commentary. Sometimes we have small conversations in Pennsylvania Dutch or about Pennsylvania Dutch. But for the most part, it's just a word a day in Pennsylvania Dutch. It's a nice way of building up your vocabulary. And when I'm writing this, I'll point out I've only got a meager 40 followers, 40. It'd be great to get to 100. So, hey, subscribe to my Twitter feed and stop making it look so pathetic. There you go. There's my advice. Making myself, trying to get myself a few more followers there. So, internet materials, 3 big ones. Now, of course, at some point, there's no other way to make progress but to do it in person. And that means you need to find someone who speaks Dutch. Now, if you're in a place where there are no Pennsylvania Dutch speakers, then obviously this is going to be hard, and you'll have to make do with Facebook groups and other things. But if you're in an area where there are Pennsylvania Dutch speakers, and as Mennonites and older Mennonites and Amish settle in more states, there are more and more states that have thriving Pennsylvania Dutch speaking communities. Go and find someone. And it won't be any random person, but basically you go to people who you know speak Dutch and you say, hey, do you know anybody who speaks Pennsylvania Dutch and would like to teach me some more or engage in conversation with me, whatever you happen to be looking for? And ask around if you don't know, or give me some hints. And usually they'll know someone who would be just the person. I'm not going to say always, but often. There'll be someone in the community who likes teaching other people, is already teaching other people perhaps, or who they know likes to talk or is very gregarious and they think would be fitted for the job. So go out there and ask, hey, do you know someone who would be interested in doing a bit of Pennsylvania Dutch lessons with me and starting this kind of a conversation group or just a conversation pair with that individual? And if you're an introverted person, that can be kind of hard at first, but it's a step you got to make because there's only one way to learn to kind of partake in the give and take in conversation, and that is by doing it, by partaking in the give and take of conversation. At first, you won't understand anything, and then you'll understand a little bit, and then you understand more, then you understand most, and you'll be surprised about how much progress you can make. Now, to make the most of those kind of in-person things, you should know a fair amount of Pennsylvania Dutch already. So I do recommend you work through books like Fry's Simple Grammar of Pennsylvania Dutch first. And that will put you in a really good place to make the most of in-person conversation in Pennsylvania Dutch. Well, those are my tips for continuing your journey on Pennsylvania Dutch. Keep learning. Mach's gut und schwätz Deutsch.